Today, we're diving into the dangerous consequences of Project 2025, a dangerous blueprint designed by conservative think tanks like the Heritage Foundation to reshape the federal government and strip away our reproductive rights. This is more than just politics. This is an all-out assault on abortion access, family planning, and even IVF treatments. If we don't act now, Project 2025 will defund and dismantle the very institutions that protect reproductive health care in this country. This is a fight for the future of healthcare and reproductive freedom. Today, we're going to walk you through the key provisions of Project 2025 and what it means for abortion and IVF access. I want to encourage everyone listening to follow us on social media and check out turnleftpac.org's Real Series, where we dig deeper into how Project 2025 is coming after your rights. Well, joining me today is Olya Makarova to share her expertise in reproductive healthcare policy and help us unpack how Project 2025 threatens abortion access and IVF treatments. Olya, welcome to the show.
Great to be back.
Absolutely. We are going to dive in to the real-world consequences of abortion bans, particularly laid out right here on page 6 of the Mandate for Leadership. They are celebrating the overturning of Roe v. Wade and spelling out how they look to abolish abortions altogether. What happens when people can't access abortion care? We're talking about forced pregnancies, trauma, and poverty. What are some of the specific effects that we can expect to see when abortion is no longer an option?
Well, over the past 30 decades, we've done an incredible job stopping teenage pregnancies from happening. They've declined about 80% since 1991. And, I don't think any young woman should have to, or old woman for that matter, should have to carry a baby that she is, not wanting in her body. I think it's a real question of fundamental freedoms, but I think you're right to say that there are a lot of downstream effects. We already have very little of a childcare system for kids in the U.S. The difficulty of getting pre-K care, of getting, in general, parents have very limited options. And I think you've seen this drive some of the declining fertility stats in the US. A lot of the right likes to make a big fuss about this. So I think it's good to actually acknowledge this and say that, a lot of the lack of childcare options, a lot of the pressures placed on women have contributed to us not having as many kids. But at the same time, a lot of what's caused that decline is the decline in teenage pregnancies. So I think that there are these balances that aren't often acknowledged. And I think the fundamental thing with abortion is that these children are not being raised in a way where they are wanted. If you want to have an abortion, you have a child instead. It might not be quite the same experience for that child. I think we should live in a world where all children are those children who are wanted and not out of fear, because in Project 2025, I don't know if we'll get onto this later in more depth, but there is a lot of talk about a surveillance system against women. They write the CDC's abortion service and maternity mortality reporting systems are woefully inadequate, and writing that liberal states have become sanctuaries for abortion tourism. And that we should use every available tool, including the cutting off of funds, to ensure that every state reports exactly how many abortions take place within its borders. So those are really radical, really overbearing government policies that Project 2025 wants to put in place. And I think you can see this kind of goal within the wider Republican Party in the way that it's just become very far right. Just trying to limit women's freedoms more broadly.
So how do these bans disproportionately impact poor and marginalized communities. What happens to those who don't have the financial or geographical access to care?
Well, at the moment, these women are often just forced to have children, and it's especially tragic in cases where the woman's life is in threat, right? Or the pregnancy itself isn't viable. We've seen this in Texas. There's been an enormous rise in infant mortality. And part of this is that some of these pregnancies could have been easily solved with, a medically necessary abortion. But even some of these medically necessary abortions are covered under, various Republican regulations. So I think you see a real tragedy there. There was a highly publicized case out of Texas where a woman who needed an abortion medically was no longer able to conceive because she didn't realize, because that pregnancy prevented her from. I think she got sepsis. I forget the really awful details of the case, but in essence, her further fertility was actually prevented by her not being able to get an abortion. So these are really backwards policies. It's really tragic that the prospective Trump administration and any Project 2025 policies it implements are doing their best to make this, at the moment, this is an issue that is kind of concentrated for a lot of poorer communities because a lot of richer people, presuming there are no sort of further medical complications, they can go out of state and get an abortion. But Project 2025 wants to shut that down too. They want to create abortion registries. And so at the moment, you have it affecting people who are poor disproportionately. I think in the future, there's a threat that, this is going to become a wider issue for American
Absolutely.
women.
And this is definitely targeting low income families. And let's not forget the rural populations. These are folks who are hardest hit who will be hardest hit by these bans and just deepening existing inequalities. It's absolutely unfair.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of this kind of comes back to the way that the Trump administration, the way that Project 2025 sees women. I think I'd love to talk a little bit more about fertility awareness-based methods, which are continuously brought up in Project 2025 as a way of contraceptive during sex that essentially doesn't rely on any of the standard methods like condoms or birth control or what have you, but instead it's just based on a woman tracking her cycle, which is obviously not a perfect science, although there is something to be said for combining that with other methods. But combined with banning pregnancy and then this talk of fertility based methods, and then they want to rebrand Biden's gender policy into women, children, and families. It just has it's very obvious that they think of women through their reproductive capacity, and that's something that they want the state to have control over, which is just such a huge step backwards from where we've been, and it's going to disproportionately affect marginalized women. But at the end of the day, their project is a lot more ambitious than that, unfortunately.
Indeed.
It's for all women in America.
Project 2025 isn't just restricting abortion access, it's defunding Planned Parenthood and other vital organizations that provide essential care. And we're going to continue this conversation after a short break.
When I ran for Congress, we flipped more Trump voters blue than any other congressional race in the country. We did this by calling out the GOP's lies and speaking truth against their $1 million attack ads. I've now partnered with Turn Left, and we're taking the fight to the extremists like Marge the Trainwreck Green, Ted Cruz, and Josh Hawley, to name a few. And I'm asking each and every one of you all to donate $25 today to the group that is absolutely helping to send these jackaloons packing. It's time to speak truth to power and turn left.
Project 2025 isn't just going after abortions, it's also targeting IVF and fertility treatments. By slashing funding for essential healthcare services, this plan threatens to to deny families the ability to have children through medical assistance. Olia, how would banning or severely restricting IVF affect families who are trying to have children but need medical assistance?
I think that this is devastating. I think there's a reason you haven't seen the IVF policies, anti-IVF policies, become hugely popular outside of Alabama. And in fact, this past presidential debate 2 days ago, Trump was trying to claim himself as a leader in fertility, very much trying to paint himself as a pro IVF guy, when in fact a lot of Christian evangelicals who support Trump view IVF as the murder of embryos because it involves harvesting sort of embryos and waiting till which one is kind of viable in order to, bring often an older woman to pregnancy. And I think that within this whole sphere of wanting these fertility awareness based methods of contraception, banning IVF, reframing women as women, children, families, it starts to like paint a wider picture of the Republican Party's vision for women and their goals. This is, just taking 30 steps backwards. And I'm hugely concerned about the impact it could have on teenage pregnancy, which we don't want. We want our girls to stay in school and not have children at like 16. It's crazy. Yeah, IVF is just one more sort of metric in this. I think that it's really a tactic to scare older women into wanting to have children younger and just further restrict female freedoms and scientific advances and sort of allowing women greater flexibility over their biology. That Project 2025 wants to destroy. So it's hard to see all this and not just feel a fury over the sort of, if you look behind the meaning of the words, it's just so much sexism and bigotry.
Well, yes, it certainly there will be emotional and social consequences that families will face. These bans on IVF, combined with abortion restrictions, seem to target anyone trying to make personal decisions about their family. What does this say about the larger agenda in Project 2025 to control reproductive choices in this country?
Yeah, I think that it's an anti-women position, but it is also anti-family because, most men, like women, have a mother, have a sister, so on, so have you. So all of these policies are going to, they're going to be bad for everyone, for the man who needs to help pay for his wife to go across 4 or 5 states to get an abortion because they can't afford another pregnancy. Or, I think the other piece of this that feels so unjust is that families, clearly don't have enough assistance with childbearing as it is. And you have seen some pretty far right figures like J.D. Vance want to increase the child tax credit, for instance, in the name of sort of family planning. But I think the thing that's really striking about Project 2025 is that it's really not about these positive policies that are trying to help families along, give them enough money that they can afford however many children they want, because, the statistics show that women in America want significantly more children than they're having. I think women want about 2.5 and they're having about 1.5 on average. So I think that it really shows an agenda of government control and having all these negative policies and restrictions. It's accomplishing the very opposite, I think, of what actually should be the wider message on children and families, which is that when women have freedom of choice, they actually really do want to have kids, just not when they're, 17 or not when they've already had 3 or 4, and that's okay.
Right, absolutely. What do you think the emotional and social consequences that these families will face because of IVF bans and abortion bans?
I mean, you've already seen reports coming out of Alabama that are really heartbreaking, that there are so many women who, previously had set up appointments with these centers. They've been hoping this had been their window into, a biological child. And having that torn away from them for some culture war, I think it's so ridiculous, and it really shows you where the Republican Party's at these days. This should be seen by anyone as a tragedy, and instead, these women are vilified in Project 2025. There's discussion of them being persecuted for crimes, women who are having abortions, and why shouldn't that by definition stretch to IVF? Because those are, if you have an anti-abortion position, if you think that an embryo is a human life, then IVF does take on a sort of moral valence, in the sense that they're raising these embryos, many of which won't become children. But to my mind, that is an argument against those embryos being equivalent to a human child, because they need to be carried by a woman. And also, I think it just depends on what's more important to you. Is it more important that women have freedom of choice, or is this sort of abstract religious kind of idea about embryos being fully formed children, is that more important to you? And I think it's very obvious where the Republican Party lands on that one. So I think, yeah.
Indeed. Project 2025's attack on IVF is an attack on families, denying them the chance to have children and control their own futures. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the global consequences of these policies right after the break.
Today, we have an amazing show for you. Join myself, special guests, and celebrities. What's going on, Ice-T? Andrew Yang. Somebody else was hopping on. Oh, hold on.
What's going on, battle?
As we roast GQP Jackaloon. He may not be a real businessman, but he is one hell of a con artist. That's what it is. That's what they got indicted for. Treason and sedition. And addresses the headlines of the day.
They must be held accountable.
Live streaming every night. I got more time in a friggin' port in a friggin' combat zone than you probably got in the military. This is Ojeda Live.
Well, let's look at the global consequences of restricting reproductive health care. Situations like we see in Uganda, where family planning is severely limited. Project 2025 outlines similar restrictions in the U.S. And if we let it happen, we could see the same outcomes: poverty, disease, and orphan children left behind. Olia, in countries like Uganda, where family planning options are limited, we see larger families struggling with poverty and children living on the streets. What lessons can we learn from these countries about the long-term impacts of restricting reproductive rights?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think that, again, this really ties into our discussion of sort of sexism and IVF, because in Uganda, women's rights are very far behind ours, which isn't just to do with reproductive rights, but also attitudes. And over the past sort of 50 years, you have seen a great deal of improvement. So for instance, right now, about half of women between the age of 20 and 50 were married before the age of 18, right? That's shocking as a statistic. But nowadays you see about 1 in 4 teenage girls are pregnant. So you can see how already it's shifted from being half of women who are older, who've already experienced this, right, to modern day, it being about a quarter of teenage girls in Uganda who are pregnant. But think about that. That is insane. If you look at the U.S. statistics, here, I'll pull them up. In 1990, almost 94% of 18 and 19-year-olds were pregnant or had a baby. In 1990, 61% of 15 to 19-year-olds had a baby. That's crazy. Modern day, about 27% of 18 or 19-year-olds have a baby. About 14% of 15 to 19-year-olds have a baby, which seems like a lot more reasonable. And I think in an ideal world, we really wouldn't have many teenage pregnancies at all. But what I'm trying to get back to with Uganda here is that we don't want to backslide into a country that has these sorts of attitudes where, young women are seen as like sexually viable. Like that's horrible. And I think you've seen that from Trump a great deal, you know, all his sort of teenage Miss America pageants. This is endemic in the Republican Party. Look at Matt Gaetz's scandal soliciting sex from a 17-year-old. And it just builds a certain impression of these guys, you know, like real creepy. And we don't want to be like Uganda. And you know, we've even seen Trump's policies end up reverberating across Uganda. So, for instance, during the Trump administration, there was a sort of gag rule on charities and NGOs working with the United States. And because of this gag rule, the progress in Uganda for improving access to abortion services, to various sort of women's health services, massively slowed down over the course of his administration. And this is a pattern that's been happening with Republican administrations. So as you go back in history, they will order this gag order on international, like, governmental organizations. And in consequence, all kind of humanitarian efforts in those areas are really slowed down. So it's very frustrating. And we certainly don't want to backslide.
So, Olia, how does a lack of access to reproductive health care contribute to broader social issues like starvation, disease, and orphanhood? And could we face similar challenges here in the United States if these bans and defunding continue under Project 2025?
Absolutely. I mean, so abortion bans are very heavily linked to sort of increased child poverty, even homelessness, you know, as women can't kind of accommodate all of their children. This is like an incredibly tragic collateral effects. I think thankfully over time across the globe, we've pretty much seen most countries get better. And part of that is that there are these NGOs and charities working in these spaces to improve access for women. So pretty much no matter where you look, things are getting better over time. It's just a question of how quickly they're getting better because, you know, as we were saying, in Uganda, the birth rate is still about 4.5 for women, but a lot of that is just teenage pregnancy. And, you know, once women have a child that early in their life, chances are they continue having children and, you know, they're not able to get jobs, they're not able to enter the workforce, they're not able to be independent providers. And so, you know, even separately from all these social issues, it is a huge issue for every single woman in that country who becomes pregnant too early, and her life is, you know, in many ways taken away from her, which isn't to say you can't flourish and have a career with a child, but, you know, it's a lot harder if you have a baby as a teenager.
Well, Olia, you have explained everything to us very well. How a lack of reproductive health care exacerbates social issues, and how Project 2025's blueprint mirrors the kinds of policies that we've seen and that has caused suffering in countries like Uganda. Thank you for being on the show, and we look forward to having you on again real soon. We've learned today how Project 2025 is a blueprint for dismantling reproductive health care in America. If this plan moves forward, we're looking at a future where abortion is banned, IVF is inaccessible, and essential services are defunded. Now is the time to act. Visit turnleftpac.org and sign up for our emails. We've created a letter that you can send directly to your representatives in Congress, demanding that they reject Project 2025's attack on reproductive rights. Share this episode, tag someone who needs to hear this, and stay informed. Project 2025 isn't just dismantling reproductive health, it's dismantling the future for millions of Americans. This blueprint will defund, dismantle, and destroy the very institutions meant to protect reproductive freedom. And we must act now.